My name is Jade Sinclair. I'm 34 years old and the founder and CEO of Horizon Hospitality Group. I've spent my entire life building this empire from scratch, brick by brick, policy by policy, promising every guest a place of dignity. But this morning, as I walked into Horizon Grand Hotel Seattle, one of my own flagship properties, dressed in a plain black t-shirt and jeans, I became invisible. Richard Holt, the hotel manager, told me loudly in front of everyone, "Get out of my lobby. This place isn't for your kind." He didn't whisper. He didn't hesitate. And he didn't know he was speaking to the very woman who signs his paycheck. But he was about to find out. I stood there in the marble lobby of the Horizon Grand, the hotel. I spent years dreaming of designing and owning, and for a moment I didn't feel like a CEO. I felt like the girl I used to be at 16, sitting alone in a lobby in Charlotte, wearing my Sunday dress and waiting for my parents, when a clerk told me, "This area is for guests only." That girl had tried to explain, tried to make herself small enough to stay, but was escorted out to the sidewalk like a loiterer. I remember the burn of that sidewalk under my thighs, the shame soaking into my bones mixing with something colder. Determination. Today, standing before Richard Holt, I could taste both again, shame and steel. His words weren't an accident. He delivered them with the confidence of a man who thought his judgment was law. Beside him, Amber Price folded her arms, eyes narrowed like knives. Jason Wu didn't even bother to hide his smirk as he locked away my black card, placing it in the brushed steel safe as if it were contraband. And around us, the lobby guests fell silent, the air tightening with the awkwardness of people who didn't want to get involved. I heard their silence louder than Richard's voice. Silence is permission. Silence is complicity. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know that at 24, I had walked into a boutique hotel in Atlanta after a red-eye flight, exhausted, wearing sweats, holding a confirmed reservation. The man behind the desk had scanned me from head to toe and said, "You don't look like someone who'd stay here." He claimed their system was down, told me to wait until the manager came in the morning. I slept in my rental car that night, my neck cramped against the window, tears soaking my hoodie. But by dawn, a plan was forming. Rage distilled into strategy. Humiliation became blueprint. Now, as Richard Holt sneered at me like I was trash, swept in from the street, that same blueprint glowed in my chest. My life's work had been built on moments like this, moments when the world tried to deny me a seat at the table, so I built an empire of my own. I felt the weight of my phone in my pocket. Cool, heavy, powerful. I pulled it out with calm fingers and dialed Cleo Daniels, my executive assistant. "It's happening," I said, my voice low and flat. There was no anger in my tone, only certainty, like granite, like the inevitability of an earthquake. On the other end, Cleo didn't ask for context. "The system is ready," she replied immediately, her voice carrying the cold efficiency I needed. Richard was still ranting, handing my card to Jason with theatrical disgust. "Lock it up," he ordered, as if sealing away something filthy. Amber pressed the intercom, her voice echoing across the lobby. "Security! Fraud alert! Unauthorized individual attempting access. Unauthorized." I felt those syllables burn into my skin like acid. Unauthorized, as if my existence needed permission from him. As if my money, my power, my ownership, as if all of it vanished the second I stood before him in a black t-shirt and jeans instead of a tailored suit. As if respect was a costume I forgot to wear today. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Rage roared silent in my chest, but my face remained carved from stone. Across the lobby, Maya Lopez, the concierge, caught my gaze. Her eyes flickered with recognition, with worry. I saw the apology in them, the apology of someone who knew she should speak, but was trapped under fear. fear of Richard. Fear of the system that crowned men like him. Amber reached for my arm, her fingers cold and tight, nails biting into my skin. "You've been warned," she hissed, trying to yank me toward the exit. "It's time for you to leave." And in that moment, something in the room shifted. The lobby seemed to breathe in, holding itself still. I saw Zoe Hart, her phone raised, filming. I saw Noah King live streaming with eyes wide in disbelief. I saw guests shifting uncomfortably, looking at each other silently, asking, "Should we do something?" I looked at Amber's hand gripping my arm, and then I looked at her. Not with anger, not with fear, with pity. "You're going to regret this," I said softly, because I wasn't 16 anymore. I wasn't 24, sleeping cramped in a car. I was Jade Sinclair, 34 years old founder and CEO of Horizon Hospitality Group, and this lobby belonged to me. But none of them knew yet. They thought they were dealing with another woman they could humiliate into silence. Another guest to eject so they could polish their marble floors and sleep soundly in the illusion of power. Richard leaned in, voice dripping with arrogance. "Your reservation is cancelled. We don't tolerate deception here. You're holding up real guests." I let out a breath, slow and controlled, letting my voice cut the air like a scalpel. "You mean the ones watching this right now?" I gestured around at the guests at the phones, raised like a forest of silent witnesses. The words slid out calm, but each syllable landed like a strike. Richard scoffed, but I saw it, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, the first crack in his fortress of entitlement. And in that pause, that single second of trembling ground beneath his feet, I felt the entire future unfold before me like a prophecy, already written. They didn't know, but they were about to, because I wasn't here to argue. I was here to remind them, this lobby, this hotel, this empire, it's mine. And today, ignorance meets consequence. I could feel the eyes on me, dozens of them piercing through the sterile air of the lobby like tiny silent arrows. Some were wide with curiosity, others narrowed with discomfort, and a few flickered with hidden cheers they were too afraid to voice. But none of that mattered. Their gazes slid off my skin like rain on glass. The only eyes that mattered were Richard's. The only moment that mattered was this one. Amber's grip tightened around my forearm like iron shackles she didn't have the right to forge. Jason Wu leaned back against the concierge counter, arms folded, lips curling into that smug smile that said he saw nothing but a stray dog about to be thrown into the street. Richard tilted his head, measuring me with that casual, venomous cruelty men like him had perfected over decades of unchallenged power. "Walk out now," he said softly, voice coated in honeyed threat. "Or we'll make that choice for you." I turned slowly, just enough to catch his gaze head on. The silence between us stretched taut, an invisible wire pulled to its breaking point. When I spoke, each syllable landed like a hammer on glass. "That's the last time you ever speak to me like that." His smirk twitched, faltered, then rebuilt itself. "Is that so?" I didn't bother answering. Instead, I raised my phone, letting the glow of its screen illuminate my face in that dim, heavy silence. "Cleo," I said, my voice calm and deliberate, "escalate the internal system. Begin full audit documentation. Log every word." "Logged," Cleo's voice replied, crisp, mechanical, unstoppable. "Systems ready?" A tremor ran through the lobby. The chatter evaporated, replaced only by the whisper of Noah King's livestream commentary. "She's not backing down," he murmured to his viewers. "Something's happening. You can feel it." Jason Wu snorted, flicking his fingers dismissively. "You think a card gets you in here? Go back to wherever you came from." That sentence, that rotting, poisonous sentence, slithered across the marble floor and coiled around the ankles of everyone watching. I didn't flinch. I simply turned to him, my gaze slicing straight through his arrogance, until I saw the flicker of doubt underneath. "Finish that sentence," I said softly, almost kindly. "Say it all the way." But he didn't. His lips worked soundlessly. The silence that followed was louder than any insult he could have spat out. Then Maya Lopez stepped from behind her podium, hands trembling, but her chin high. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. "Her reservation is valid. I saw it this morning. Jade Sinclair Penthouse Suite Executive Override Clearance." Richard's head snapped towards her so fast his composure cracked. "One more word and you're out too." But Maya didn't move, and for the first time I saw something solid in her spine, something fierce and unbreakable. Amber pressed the intercom again. "Security, unauthorized guest resisting removal. Possible fraudulent card. Possible fraudulent card." The phrase rang in my ears like a bell tolling for every indignity I'd ever swallowed. My entire life I've watched people reduce me to a possibility. Possible guest, possible risk, possible criminal, possible threat. But I am not a possibility. I am certainty made flesh. I raised my phone again, my tone now calm enough to chill bone. "Veronica Shields," I said. Seconds later, her voice came through hard and cold as tempered steel. "Ms. Sinclair, authorized full termination protocol for Richard Holt, Amber Price, and Jason Wu. Effective immediately. Freeze their access. Log this incident for legal escalation." "Confirmed," Veronica replied without hesitation. A heartbeat of perfect silence followed, stretching across the lobby like eternity, frozen in place. Then one by one, their badges blinked red. Richard's first, then Amber's, then Jason's. The safe behind Jason clicked open with a mechanical sigh, its contents now under Maya's control. Jason's smirk disintegrated as his badge buzzed uselessly against the scanner, reality sinking in like cold water through thin clothes. Noah King's voice shook with adrenaline as he whispered into his mic. "Oh my God! She just fired them. Live!" In front of everyone. Zoe Hart raised her phone recording with unblinking focus. "This is what real power looks like?" she breathed to her followers. Richard stumbled for words, rage darkening his features, as his voice rose brittle with panic. "This is illegal. You can't just..." I stepped forward, closing the space between us with silent, measured steps. My voice dropped to a low, dangerous softness that made the entire lobby lean in to hear. "You think leadership is about shouting orders from behind a desk?" I said, my gaze locked on his. "But it isn't. It's about knowing when to burn that desk to the ground." He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. Only a trembling exhale escaped his lips, quivering with a fury that no longer had anywhere to live. Amber backed away, her face pale and lost. Jason stared down at his useless badge, then up at me, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Not because I was cruel, but because I was real. Because I was no longer a dream they could dismiss, no longer a possibility they could erase. I was here, solid and immovable. Maya stepped closer to my side, her voice now clear and strong. "They've been removed," she announced to the lobby. "They no longer speak for Horizon." And the lobby erupted, not in chaos, but in a rising murmur of relief, disbelief, outrage, and something else. Something deeper. Respect. I turned, scanning the room. An elderly woman clutched her phone to her chest, tears glittering in her eyes. A businessman nodded solemnly. Zoe and Noah stood frozen, filming history, as it unfolded unfiltered. Finally, I turned back to Richard Holt, Amber Price, and Jason Wu, letting my gaze rest on each of them, unhurried and precise, like a blade gliding across exposed skin. "You tried to erase me today," I said quietly. "You tried to decide who deserved to be here, who mattered. But you forgot the first rule of hospitality. I paused, letting the silence gather like a storm about to break. It isn't about the smile you fake. It's about the respect you assume. And with that, Maya reached into the open safe, retrieved my black card, and placed it gently in my hand. Its weight felt different now. Heavier. Righteous. Mine. As Richard, Amber, and Jason stood behind the desk, they no longer owned, stripped of titles, stripped of power, stripped of the illusions they'd clung to like armor. I turned away. I didn't need to watch them crumble. I was too busy rising. Just as the silence in the lobby settled around me like a final judgment, my phone buzzed in my palm. I glanced down. The caller ID lit up with a name that made my chest tighten. Robert Keller, chairman of Horizon Hospitality's board. The man who once told me I was the future of the company. I answered, pressing the phone to my ear. His voice came through cold and sharp, like steel biting into bone. "Jade, what the hell are you doing? Live streams are exploding. Shareholders are calling me in panic. You think humiliating your own staff in public makes you a leader? Retract those terminations now, or the board will convene to vote on your removal by Friday. You will not drag Horizon down with your personal vendettas." For a brief moment, the marble floor seemed to shift under my feet, but I steadied myself, tightening my grip on the phone until my knuckles burned. I could still see Richard's pale, trembling face, Amber's downcast eyes, Jason's silence. I could see Maya standing beside me, her back straighter than ever. I let out a quiet breath and said, "Thank you for clarifying where you stand, Robert. But let me clarify where I stand. If Horizon's value depends on protecting bigots it deserves to burn, call your vote. I'll be ready." Then I ended the call. My hand trembling not with fear, but with fury, sharpened into resolve. This wasn't over. This was only the beginning. I stood there in the lobby, feeling the cold marble beneath my shoes, hearing the quiet crackle of tension all around me. Richard Holt's badge still blinked red, a silent scarlet letter branding him for what he was. Amber Price stared at the floor. Her posture collapsed like a condemned building. Jason Wu hadn't moved his eyes, darting between me, the guests filming, and Maya Lopez standing beside me like an unsheathed blade. But my mind wasn't just here. It spun back to every lobby I'd been thrown out of, every checkout counter where I was treated like an inconvenience, every conference room where men twice my age spoke over my ideas, then presented them as their own. Every closed door, every forced apology, every silence I swallowed to survive. Richard was just the final crack in a dam already crumbling under its own rot. My phone buzzed. Robert Keller, chairman of Horizon's board, my mentor once. The man who shook my hand the day I signed my first hotel contract under Horizon. Jade, his voice snapped through the speaker low and sharp. "What the hell are you doing?" Live streams of this fiasco are everywhere. Shareholders are demanding answers. You think humiliating staff in public makes you a leader. His words hit like stones, but there was no pain, only clarity. "Retract those terminations now," Robert continued, "or the board will vote on your removal by Friday. Horizon won't burn for your vendettas." I inhaled deeply, the cold lobby air clearing my thoughts. Maya whispered, "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, feeling its edge cut into my skin like a blade. Then I spoke each word, quiet and final. "Thank you for clarifying where you stand, Robert. Let me clarify where I stand. If Horizon's value depends on protecting bigots like these, then it deserves to burn. Call your vote. I'll be ready." I ended the call before he could respond. My thumb hovered over the screen as adrenaline raced through me, leaving a cold, metallic taste in my mouth. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. My hand trembled, then steadied. Richard laughed short and incredulous. "You just ended your career. Tomorrow they'll book flights and rooms and forget your name." I studied his face, the sweat beading at his temple, the twitch of fear in his jaw. "No," I said softly. "They'll remember my name. Because it's on every paycheck you've ever cashed, on every chandelier hanging in this lobby, on every contract you ignored. But more than that, Richard, they'll remember how you fell." The hush that followed was deeper than silence. Zoe Hart whispered to her phone. "She's not just fighting them. She's fighting the whole system." And she was right. This wasn't just about Richard, Amber, or Jason. It was about a culture that trained them to decide who mattered. Every manager who filed a complaint under guest problem instead of staff misconduct. Every silent nod when someone like me was called unauthorized. I turned to the lobby. The elderly woman with tears in her eyes. The businessman, nodding with quiet pride. A young bellboy peeking from behind a pillar, hope flickering across his face. "Everyone," I said, my voice clear. "I am Jade Sinclair, founder and CEO of Horizon Hospitality. As of this moment, this hotel is under reform. Every staff member complicit in today's violation of dignity is terminated or under investigation. If you've been mistreated here, our internal team will remain all week. No PR scripts, just answers." The lobby buzzed with rising energy. Maya turned to me, eyes bright with disbelief. "You're risking everything." I shook my head. "I'm claiming everything. There's a difference." I raised my phone again. "Cleo," I said. "Yes, Ms. Sinclair. Draft an emergency board memo. I'm calling for the resignation of Robert Keller as chairman, effective immediately." There was a pause, then Cleo's calm reply, "Understood." Richard let out a broken laugh. "You're insane. You'll take us all down." I turned to him and smiled. Not cruel. Final. "No, Richard. I'm not taking Horizon down. I'm saving it. From people like you." In that moment, standing beneath chandeliers and marble columns, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Not the freedom to exist, but to fight without fear of losing everything. Because I had already lost everything, once sleeping in a rental car at 24, tears soaking my hoodie stomach empty, resolve blooming in my chest like a knife of light. I survived that. I built this. And now I would rebuild it again, stone by stone, policy by policy, with or without men who thought their power was untouchable. Because at the end of the day, it was never about their power. It was always about mine. I could feel the room shifting around me, as if gravity itself was bending under the weight of what had just happened. Phones remained raised mid-air guests, frozen in half-breaths, watching every flicker of movement like spectators witnessing the final act of a tragedy or the first spark of a revolution. Richard Holt stood there with his badge blinking red sweat gathering along his temple before sliding down the deep lines of his face. His eyes darted from me to the front desk he no longer owned, searching desperately for an exit, for rescue, for any force that could rewind time and undo what I had just done. Amber Price stood beside him, her trembling hands gripping the counter's edge so tightly, her knuckles had turned bone-white. Jason Wu's smirk had died long ago. Now he simply looked small, shoulders slumped, eyes dulled with shock, as if the world he built for himself had crumbled into dust. Then Maya Lopez stepped forward, the quiet hum of her heels echoing like gunshots on the marble floor. Her voice rang out clear and bright, slicing clean through the heavy silence. "They've been removed," she said to the room, to the world, to history itself. "They don't speak for Horizon anymore." For a moment there was nothing but silence, so thick, it felt like the lobby itself had forgotten how to breathe. Then the whispers rose, hushed yet sharp, with awakening truth. "She's the CEO. This changes everything. Did you hear how he spoke to her like she was nothing?" Their words brushed against my skin like a gathering wind, stirring forgotten embers back to flame. But none of them, not Richard, not the guests, not even Maya knew what was coming next. I turned slowly, scanning the grand lobby. My eyes landed on the concierge podium on the gold-plated plaque that read, "Horizon Grand, where excellence lives." A smile curved at the corner of my lips, a smile that was part pride, part rage, and part something wilder, something free. Excellence. They built slogans out of words like that. They chiseled them into marble, embossed them in gold, on glossy brochures, handed out with champagne at investor galas. But excellence wasn't a slogan. It wasn't a plaque. It was a promise. A promise I intended to keep, even if it cost me every last cent and every last breath. I lifted my phone again and dialed Cleo Daniels. Her voice came through immediately calm and ready. "Yes, Ms. Sinclair. Patch me through to Veronica Shields." I said my voice so low, it vibrated with an anger that felt like steel in my chest, forged and sharpened over decades of silent humiliation. A moment later, Veronica's cool, razor-edged voice filled my ear. "Ms. Sinclair?" Veronica began immediate legal audit on Horizon Grand. Pull all guest complaints from the last 24 months. Cross-reference them with terminated staff IDs. Log everything for compliance and litigation. "Understood," she replied without hesitation. "Initiating now." Richard let out a strangled laugh, the sound ugly and cracked. "You think you're saving this place. You're killing it. Lawsuits, board backlash, investors pulling out. You'll drown Horizon in scandal." I turned to him, tilting my head slightly, studying the sagging lines of his aging face the way fear flickered behind his crumbling bravado. "No," I said softly, each word a scalpel. "I'm drowning your legacy. Horizon will survive. But it will survive without you." His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish gasping on a dock under the burning sun, unable to draw a single breath of safety. Then came the moment that cracked the room wide open. Maya stepped forward again, her voice trembling, but strong, with a righteous fury that electrified the silent lobby. "There's something everyone should know," she said, glancing at me for permission. I nodded once firmly. "I've worked here for 3 years." Maya continued louder now, letting her words echo off the marble and glass. "Every time a guest like Ms. Sinclair came in, alone, confident, dressed down, they treated them like criminals. I saw it again and again. Complaints filed, dismissed as misunderstandings labeled policy enforcement." She turned her gaze on Richard, her eyes blazing with tears and anger. "But it wasn't policy. It was you." Gasps rippled across the lobby. Guests shifted uncomfortably, their unease hardening into outrage. Zoe Hart zoomed her phone camera in on Maya's face, live streaming to tens of thousands watching, in stunned silence. Richard's face turned an ashen gray, as if her words had drained the blood from his veins. "That's a lie," he rasped, voice shaking. "I was following protocol." "No." I cut in, stepping forward until only inches separated us. "You were following prejudice." He flinched back as if struck, his lips curled into a snarl, desperation bleeding through. "Why didn't you just tell us who you were?" he spat. "Why hide it and set us up like this?" I inhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment crystallize in my chest, sharp and certain. Then I leaned in close enough for only him to hear, because I shouldn't have to. His eyes widened as the truth slammed into him with the force of a tidal wave. For a flicker of a second, I saw him break, truly break, under the realization that his power was never real. I straightened, raising my voice so that every person in the lobby, every staff member peeking from back halls, every guest holding their phone high could hear. This was never about who I am. I said each syllable deliberate and cutting. It was about who you are when you think no one's watching, when you think the person in front of you has no power, when you think their dignity is optional. Silence, thick, heavy, alive with reckoning. Then, like dawn breaking over black water, voices rose. She owns this hotel. She owns everything. Richard let out a choked noise that might have been a sob. Amber was crying openly now, her mascara streaking black rivers down her cheeks. Jason Wu simply stared at the floor, as if praying it would open up and swallow him whole. I turned to Maya. Her eyes were brimming with tears, but her gaze was steady and unbreakable. I reached out and squeezed her hand. "Thank you," I whispered, "for speaking truth when silence was safer." She shook her head, tears spilling over. "No, thank you for giving me something worth speaking for." I turned back to the lobby to the guests who watched with wide eyes, to Zoe and Noah, streaming history into the veins of the internet, to staff frozen in doorways with hope flickering across their faces. Then I lifted my phone, one last time. "Cleo," I said, my voice calm, as winter rain falling on steel. "Yes, Miss Sinclair. Prepare the reform announcement, effective immediately. Horizon Grand is under direct owner supervision. All staff will undergo mandatory recertification and diversity compliance review. Terminated staff are permanently barred from Horizon employment." "Understood." Cleo replied, her voice steady as iron. As I lowered my phone, the lobby exhaled a collective breath, released by people who had been holding their lungs tight for far too long. I turned to Richard, Amber, and Jason. Their power gone, their futures unmade, their illusions shattered beyond repair. "You spent your careers deciding who belonged here," I said softly, letting the truth settle like ash in their bones. "Today I decide who doesn't." Then I turned away, Maya stepping beside me, and together we walked through the lobby. Guests parted before us like water around a ship's bow, their faces awash with awe, relief, and the stunned silence of witnessing real power. In that moment, I wasn't just Jade Sinclair, CEO. I was Jade Sinclair, woman, warrior, architect of justice. And for the first time in my life, I felt whole. Because today they didn't just see my power, they saw my humanity, and they would never unsee it again. I could feel the room shifting around me, as if gravity itself was bending under the weight of what had just happened. Phones remained raised mid-air, guests, frozen mid-breath, watching every flicker of movement, like spectators witnessing the final act of a tragedy or the first spark of a revolution. Richard Holt stood there, his badge blinking red sweat sliding down the deep lines of his face. His eyes darted from me to the front desk he no longer controlled, searching desperately for an exit, for rescue, for any force that could rewind time and undo what I had just done. Beside him, Amber Price clutched the counter so tightly, her knuckles blanched white, her whole body trembling, like a condemned building before collapse. Jason Wu's smirk had died long ago. Now he simply looked small, shoulders hunched, eyes dulled with shock, as if the world he built around himself had turned to ash in his mouth. Maya Lopez stepped forward, her quiet footsteps echoing through the silent lobby. Her voice rang out clear and bright, slicing the heavy tension like a blade. "They've been removed," she declared, her words reverberating off marble and glass. "They don't speak for Horizon anymore." For a moment, silence reigned, so absolute, I could hear the ragged edge of my own breathing. Then the whispers rose, hushed but sharp with awakening truth. "She's the CEO," someone breathed. "This changes everything," another whispered. "Did you hear how he spoke to her? Like she was nothing." Their words brushed against my skin like a wind, stirring forgotten embers back into flame. But none of them knew what was coming next. I turned, scanning the grand lobby, my gaze landing on the concierge podium, and its gold-plated plaque reading, "Horizon Grand, where excellence lives." A smile curved at the corner of my lips, something between pride and rage, something feral and free. Excellence. They built slogans out of words like that. They chiseled them into marble and embossed them in gold on glossy brochures handed out at galas with champagne. But excellence wasn't a slogan. It was a promise I intended to keep even if it cost me everything. I lifted my phone again and dialed Cleo Daniels. Her voice came through instantly. Calm, prepared, unbreakable. "Yes, Ms. Sinclair. Patch me through to Veronica Shields." I ordered my voice so low it vibrated with a cold steel anger forged over decades of silent humiliation. Seconds later, Veronica's voice filled my ear sharp as a razor. "Ms. Sinclair." Veronica began immediate legal audit on Horizon Grand. Pull all guest complaints from the last 24 months. Cross-reference with terminated staff IDs. Log everything for compliance and litigation. "Understood," she replied without pause. "Initiating now." Richard let out a strangled laugh, the sound harsh and broken. "You think you're saving this place. You're killing it. Lawsuits, board backlash. Investors pulling out, you'll drown Horizon in scandal." I turned to him, studying his sagging face, the sweat beading on his temple, the flicker of fear behind his bravado. "No," I said softly, my voice a scalpel. "I'm drowning your legacy. Horizon will survive, but it will survive without you." His mouth opened and closed, soundless like a fish gasping on a dock suffocating under the sun. Then Maya stepped forward again, her voice trembling, but strong with righteous fury. "There's something everyone should know," she said, glancing at me. I nodded once firmly. "I've worked here 3 years." Maya continued louder now, each word echoing like a bell. "Every time a guest like Ms. Sinclair came in, alone, confident dressed down, they treated them like criminals. I saw it over and over. Complaints filed, dismissed as misunderstandings, labeled policy enforcement." She turned to Richard, tears glistening in her eyes but her voice unshaken. "But it wasn't policy. It was you." Gasps rippled through the lobby. Guests shifted their unease, hardening into anger. Zoe Hart zoomed in with her phone, streaming to tens of thousands watching in stunned silence. Richard's face went pale, drained of all its bluster. "That's a lie," he rasped, voice cracking. "I was following protocol." "No!" I interrupted, stepping forward until I was only inches from him. "You were following prejudice." He flinched back as if slapped, his snarl, unraveling into desperation. "Why didn't you just tell us who you were?" He spat, voice rising. "Why hide it and set us up like this?" I inhaled deeply, letting his words roll off me like water off stone. Then I leaned in close enough that only he could hear. "Because I shouldn't have to." His eyes widened, realization slamming into him like a tidal wave, and for a moment I saw him break under the truth he could no longer deny. I straightened, my voice rising so all could hear. "This was never about who I am," I said, each syllable falling with hammer force. "It was about who you are when you think no one's watching, when you think the person in front of you has no power, when you think their dignity is optional." Silence fell thick and alive, the kind that changes people forever. Then came the murmurs. "She owns this hotel. She owns all of it." Richard let out a choked noise, half sob, half rage. Amber was crying openly, mascara streaking her cheeks like black tears. Jason Wu simply stared at the floor, his shoulders shaking under the weight of shame. I turned to Maya, her eyes brimming with tears yet fierce with pride. I reached out and squeezed her trembling hand. "Thank you," I whispered, "for speaking truth when silence was safer." She shook her head, tears falling freely now. No. Thank you for giving me something worth speaking for. I turned back to the lobby to the guests watching, wide-eyed to Zoe and Noah, streaming this moment into the veins of the internet to staff frozen in doorways, with hope dawning across their faces like sunrise over dark water. I lifted my phone one last time. Cleo. Yes, Ms. Ash Sinclair. Prepare the reform announcement. Effective immediately. Horizon Grand is under direct owner supervision. All staff will undergo mandatory recertification and diversity compliance review. Terminated staff are barred from Horizon employment permanently. Understood. Cleo replied, her voice solid as steel. As I lowered my phone, the lobby seemed to exhale, a collective breath released by people who had been holding it for far too long. I turned to Richard, Amber, and Jason. Their power gone, their futures unmade, their illusions shattered beyond repair. You spent your careers deciding who belonged here, I said, softly, my voice ablade. Today I decide who doesn't. Then I turned away, Maya stepping beside me, and together we walked through the lobby. Guests parted before us like water around a ship's bow, their faces lit with awe, relief, and the silent understanding that they had just witnessed something that could never be undone. In that moment, I wasn't just Jade Sinclair, CEO. I was Jade Sinclair, woman, warrior, architect of justice. And for the first time in my life, I felt whole. Because today, they didn't just see my power. They saw my humanity, and they would never unsee it again. I stood in the center of the lobby, feeling the gravity of every eye upon me. Richard Holt, Amber Price, and Jason Wu were no longer employees. They stood there stripped of their titles, of their certainty, of the illusions they had wrapped around themselves, like armor. Their badges blinked red in silent condemnation, small pulsing lights that exposed them for what they were. Their futures, once so secure they wore their cruelty without fear, were now nothing but empty rooms, echoing with everything they had lost. But the truth was, this wasn't about them anymore. It never really had been. I turned to Maya Lopez standing at my side, with her shoulders squared, eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. She had been the quietest voice in the room, the one overlooked, underestimated, ignored, and yet hers was the only voice that mattered today. Maya, I said softly, letting the warmth fill my words so only she could hear effective immediately. You are promoted to General Manager of Horizon Grand. Her breath hitched a sharp intake that sounded like hope itself. Ms. Sinclair Jade I placed a hand gently on her arm. You earned this, Maya. Not because you defended me, but because you defended what's right. She nodded, lips trembling as she fought back a sob that was equal parts relief, pride, and shock. Around us, the guests watched in silence. Then someone began to clap slow and deliberate, the clap of truth, rather than spectacle. Another followed, and then another, until a low chorus of applause filled the lobby with something close to reverence. A woman whispered into her phone. She's changing everything right here, right now. I lifted my phone once more, feeling its familiar weight like a weapon reforged. Cleo. Yes, Ms. Sinclair. Initiate immediate Horizon Grand Reform Protocol. Suspend standard front desk operations. All upcoming check-ins will be manually processed by Maya Lopez and a temporary transition team. Offer complimentary transfers to our downtown partner location for overflow guests. Issue direct communication to every guest on site, explaining the leadership change and inviting honest feedback within 48 hours. Understood. Drafting and sending now. Also, I continued my voice sharpening into command that cut through the echoing lobby. Prepare a company-wide audit announcement. Effective this week, Horizon Hospitality will review all 57 properties nationwide. Every guest complaint, every staff conduct file, every discrimination claim. No exception. No settlement without board-level review. Confirmed, Cleo replied, her tone steady as iron. Richard let out a broken, hysterical laugh, the sound harsh against the silent applause. You think this will fix anything? You'll bankrupt Horizon with your witch hunts. I turned to him, slowly, my gaze steady and unblinking, letting my words fall like quiet judgment. No, Richard,